right, and we're here to talk a little bit about Lyme disease and ticks. So I understand that you have Lyme disease.
I do. Well, I was diagnosed almost 15 years ago, actually. So I have a long history of experience with acute Lyme disease, long-term repercussions of Lyme disease. I've been an advocate for many years. And so, yeah, I have a good amount of experience with Lyme disease, unfortunately.
Yeah, for sure. And tell me, how did you get diagnosed? How did you get the disease?
So I actually never did find a tick attached, and that's one of the things that people often think is that you have to have a tick actually attached, you have to find it, it has to be. I actually did not have that experience. It took me a few times to get diagnosed too. I had several negative tests before I got a positive test, which is something that happens to a lot of people actually, which is kind of frustrating and difficult for people when they feel really sick, but the tests keep coming back negative. And that was the experience for me for quite some time. Yeah. They don't test directly for the Lyme bacteria. They actually test for antibodies for it. And a lot of times people don't. It might be too early, it might be too late, it might be someone who has immune issues where you don't actually aren't mounting a response. So that's one of those things seemed to be what happened to me. So it took me a little bit of time to get that positive test.
Wow, I didn't know that it could take multiple times to go get tested to find out. Do you know how many times you were tested?
4 or 5 times actually over the course of several months before I actually got a positive test.
Yeah, what were your symptoms that you knew something was wrong?
Wow, so I had a lot of the typical symptoms that you hear with like fatigue and joint pain, and then I had a lot of sort of atypical symptoms that not a lot of mainstream media kind of promotes, and that is I had a lot of visual issues, I had extreme brain fog, I had issues with my skin, I had GI issues. So I was very, very sick for quite some time, and again it took me kind of being an advocate for myself to finally keep pushing in order to get that positive test in order to get treatment.
Yeah, for sure. Why was it so important for you to become an advocate on a subject like this?
Well, because the testing can be so inaccurate and unreliable, people do not get treatment if they don't test positive for Lyme. It isn't a disease that doctors are often willing to treat by clinical symptoms. So it's important for people to know that the testing isn't always accurate and to keep pushing and advocating for themselves to get a positive test. Something else to keep in mind is that the rash that people talk about, the bullseye rash, about 30% of people don't get that rash. So that's another thing that's very common, is for people to hear like, the doctor said I didn't have a rash, so I probably don't have Lyme. And a lot of people don't get that rash, or it presents in a very different way.
Yeah, for sure. And so as an advocate, what has some people you've advocated for said to you, or what is the reaction to everything you do for them and the people in your community who also face this disease?
It can be very difficult to get diagnosed with Lyme disease, and because of that you often will not get treatment. And there are a lot of people in this country who did not get diagnosed initially and ended up suffering long term. And even though I did eventually get a positive test, I do suffer symptoms still now. And there's a lot of controversy whether that's because of the actual infection or it's some kind of post-Lyme syndrome. Either way, people do suffer for a very long period of time, often with this illness. So it was important for me to be a voice for people and for myself to say that we can suffer for long periods of time from this illness, and people deserve to get treatment. And because of the controversy around it, unfortunately, a lot of doctors aren't willing to treat long term.
It is a little bit of a controversial subject. Like myself, I don't know much about Lyme disease at all. So why do you think it is something that people don't really talk about?
Well, a lot of the controversy actually kind of stems from the medical community, unfortunately. So I think that's part of where it's not talked about a lot, and a lot of people just know what they know from their doctor. And for those of us who are in the Lyme community and who have been longtime sufferers, we kind of know that the testing can be sort of inaccurate and inconclusive. the diagnosis is sometimes difficult to get, and because of that, you don't get treatment. So doctors are, they do have guidelines they have to go by, and unfortunately, people who have Lyme for longer periods than the initial, infective period don't kind of fit into those guidelines. So it's difficult for us to find treatment. And because of that, it's also difficult for us to have insurance companies cover our treatment. So a lot of people do suffer for long periods of time with some of the symptoms that persist past the initial infection.
Right.
So these are things that not a lot of the public even really know unless they've experienced it themselves or someone they love has experienced it.
No.
For the most part, they say that Lyme disease in and of itself is mostly just caused by ticks, but there are other co-infections that get spread, other tick-borne illnesses that get spread by ticks and other vectors, and these co-infections exist with Lyme disease. They go together often, and these infections also keep people very sick too. So that's another reason why Lyme can be very difficult to treat. We call them Lyme and other vector-borne diseases can be very difficult to treat, and why people sort of stay ill for long periods of time.
Yeah, and what are some of the symptoms you still face?
Yeah, I still have a lot of brain fog. I have a lot of GI issues. I have major sleep issues. I still get joint pain here and there. I have vision issues. I've had visual inflammation to the point where I actually had a torn retina because of the inflammation in my brain and the back of my eye. So I do inflammatory issues are very, very common in people who have persistent symptoms past their initial period of infection.
Right, and before your diagnosis, did you know anyone who had it?
The people who I knew who had it were probably not people not very close to me, and I sort of had the misperception too and misconception that it was like people who haven't had it, that it was self-limiting and easy to treat and very straightforward, and really it's none of those things, unfortunately.
Yeah, for sure. And Hayden was telling me that now your daughter and his sister actually just got diagnosed.
Yes, and she actually did get a positive test her first time, but she has had symptoms, pervasive symptoms, all different things that I mentioned before, like stomach issues, GI, brain fog, joint pain, all different kinds of symptoms that were not able to be diagnosed by other physicians. It took a long time before a doctor said maybe you have Lyme disease. So that's another thing that's sort of like for people to keep on the radar is if you have health conditions that persist for long periods of time and no one can really figure out what's going on, a lot of times it's a wise choice to try to get some Lyme testing done and not to just get one test, to get several. Her symptoms came prior to a recent bite. Sometimes people get bites in the past and they don't often know, and your immune system can kind of, for a lot of people, this is why a lot of people don't remain sick and other people do, is your immune system can kind of like, a lot of people's immune system is strong enough to like kind of knock out the infection and handle it. And that's with like a lot of illnesses and a lot of diseases. And some people, they just can't. So we kind of felt like her immune system was holding it at bay, but she had all these kind of weird symptoms. And then recently she did get another bite. And I think what happened is when she got that new bite, it sort of sent her into what became a positive diagnosis. And she did happen to have the Lyme rash this time, the traditional bullseye rash. Interestingly enough, she went to urgent care and they did not treat her for Lyme and they did not test her for Lyme, even with the bullseye rash. So that happens as well, is you'll get kind of like, oh, that looks like a spider bite. Oh, that looks like ringworm. Especially if you go to like an urgent care or an emergency room where it's not considered an emergency, right? So there's obstacles kind of at every turn with this disease.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm sure your daughter is happy to have you as a personal advocate for herself.
She is. A lot of the treatment that you do have to do is on your own. A lot of times you do have to do naturalistic treatments and holistic things and try a lot of different modalities to attack this. In fact, you do have to do that. So it's been good that I have a history and I'm able to help her through this process. And then we also have, we'll be having a Lyme specialist come on board to help her as well.
Nice, amazing. And so with it being officially tick season, unfortunately, what is something you would like the public to maybe know?
Yes, I think it's important for people to know that I think everybody knows kind of check for ticks. That's obviously important. You will often hear that you'll hear people say, we don't have Lyme disease in this state. Well, Lyme disease actually has been found in almost every state. And, you know, the ticks travel on animals, they travel on birds. These creatures don't know state lines. So you pretty much should be checking for ticks and watching for the symptoms of Lyme disease no matter where you live.
Yeah.
And don't be complacent to think that even if it's winter, you can't get infected, because you definitely can.
Yeah.
So those are some important things to remember with regard to ticks, and they can be very, very small. Some of them can be as small as like a dot on your hand from a pen.
Oh gosh, that makes me nervous.
Yeah, it's really, really important to check for ticks all the time. And also remember that it doesn't have to be attached and engorged for any period of time for you to get infected. And that did not happen to me. I actually did have a traditional bullseye rash. I never did find a tick attached to me.
Wow.
So those are some things to really keep in mind with regard to the actual tick awareness aspect.
And then I know it's been pretty brief, but is there anything that you just want to ask or add that maybe I didn't ask?
I would just like to say on behalf of myself and people who have suffered the repercussions of Lyme disease for long periods of time, that the general public be aware of these incidences and these people who suffer from this disease, and be empathetic to it, and not always kind of focus on what they've always heard, because I know for me, I have suffered for a very long time, and I know like tens of thousands of other people in some groups that I belong to who have done the same. So I just think it's important to sort of be open-minded and be more aware than what we've currently been talking about with regard to Lyme disease.
No, yeah, for sure. I think that's important with Lyme disease and a million other
any
diseases that are around that people don't talk enough about.